When I was driving up from East York today, I drove into Bond Head, and that started me thinking about the Lieutenant Governor, Sir Francis Bond Head, who I presume the hamlet is named after. And we're trying to work out whether it was in 1837 that it was named. Bond Head is a part of my story, a small part. I'm going to talk about something that I've been interested in for over 30 years. And June was asking me, how did I become interested? Well, I'm a historian. I ran the John Park homestead, which is down on Lake Erie. And I started hearing these stories about in 1838, Hickory Island was invaded and held by rebels for a week. I thought, well, that's strange. Then I heard about the Battle of Windsor, where in fact rebels came across from Detroit and captured Windsor. And I thought, well, isn't this curious? It's not in my history book. Then Pili Island Wine, who some of you probably had tried their products, came out with something called Fenian Cuvée. And I said to them, I hope you didn't get too many of those labels printed. And they said, why? And I said, well, there were no Fenians on Pili Island. It was the Patriots. It was the rebels from 1838. So there is confusion. And if anything, after tonight's talk, I would hope you would go away not confused, because I think the rebellion of 1838, which is quite separate from the rebellion of 1837, is a more dramatic event in our history. There were 13 incursions, armed incursions, from the United States into Canada. And that's what I'm going to tell you about tonight. I'm going to tell you about the consequences when Sir Francis Bond Head, because he was incompetent, was sent back to England, and he was replaced by Sir George Arthur, who became the Lieutenant Governor. That was in the middle of the rebellion in 1838. Does anybody know what job Sir George Arthur held before he came to Upper Canada? He was the Lieutenant Governor of Van Diemen's Land. He was the man that set up the penal colonies there, and he's a large part of the story, because when he was trying to figure out what am I going to do with over 1,000 rebels, he said, I know, I'm going to send the ringleaders to Van Diemen's Land, and that's exactly what he did. So the story is also about 92 English-speaking patriots or rebels that were sent there as political prisoners. They weren't common felons, they were political prisoners. I'm going to show you a lot of slides, and I haven't digitized, so you're going to get a slideshow tonight, of Tasmania, as it's called today, and then just at the end, sum up. So what I'm going to do now is show you a few views of what Upper Canada looked like in 1838. They're few and far between, but this is one done by Lieutenant Philip Bainbridge. A wonderful artist. He was part of the British Army. He moved around Upper Canada. This is a view of the Western District, which is down on Lake Erie. This is near where Wheatley is today. And that's what it looked like. It was really a battle against nature. You would chop out down the trees, build your cabin. If you lived down in the Talbot District, you would have to clear the road in front of your house before you owned the property. So that's an interesting view of 1838 in Upper Canada. This is another view, and you can see really a similar scene, that it's eking out of the forest your first home. This is out of Willis and Bartlett's Canadian Scenery, and again, a battle with nature in Upper Canada. This is a forest camp by Sir James Alexander. He's written an interesting book. He was in Canada for 7 years called Lacade, and this is his view of the forest scene. Now, when I come to give these talks, I have a prize, so I think we'll get rid of that right now. Can anybody tell me what that view might be of? This is another Bainbridge original from the summer of 1838. Any ideas where that is?
Niagara of the Lake?
Other end of the province.
Oh. Barrie.
Amherstburg?
Ah, who said that?
Jen.
And you win, and you get actually an Ontario history with an article in here by Chris Rabel on Mackenzie. So that's yours. Good for you. This is actually a wonderful picture looking from the Detroit River aboard a vessel across to Fort Malden in Amherstburg. Now this is where Francis Bond Head comes into the story, because he decided he was going to send all the regular troops from Upper Canada to Lower Canada, and so he did. There were no troops in Upper Canada. In the summer of 1838, the rebels, and they called themselves the Patriots, decided, well, we're going to cross the Detroit River and we're going to attack Fort Malden and we're going to capture it, because there are no troops there, thanks to Sir Francis Bond Head. So that was their major first attempt, an incursion. If you go to Amherstburg today, that's some of the buildings that are left. This is an 1819 building from Fort Malden. Unfortunately, it's another Parks Canada site that, because of funding, it's hardly ever open. But try to go and see it, because it's original. There's the commissariat building, so these buildings would have been there in 1838. The first incursion then occurred in January 6th to 9th, 1838 on the Detroit River. And it involved the schooner Anne, which was an American schooner, which was hijacked by the Patriots. They came across the river. The idea was they were going to bombard Fort Malden. And they also came across and took Bois Blanc Island, which is now called Bob Lowe Island. It used to be an amusement park in the middle of the Detroit River. And so that's what they did. No pictures of that, but J.C.H. Forster did this for Parks Canada. So that's the view of the battle, the schooner Anne. These men were ill-equipped. They were place soldiers. They didn't have a background. What happened was the schooner grounded. It was a complete fiasco. Bois Blanc Island, and you can see Bois Blanc Island. This is Fort Malden here. Bois Blanc Island is across the Detroit River, and so this is the island that the rebels did hold for about a day until the troops who had come back pushed them out. Very few artifacts left of the period, but this is the actual rebel flag that was on the schooner Anne, and if you go to Fort Malden, if it's open, you can see that flag. Now, something that we take for granted are these historic plaques in Ontario. We probably never even read them, or we drive past them quickly, but I'll tell you right now, they're important, because this tells you about the capture of the schooner Anne, right where it happened. It's a parkway along the Detroit River. You would never know unless those signs were up, so those are good. And in Tasmania, I've been trying now for 20 years for the state to put up signs because they don't have any. So those are helpful. The next incursion happened here. And you say, well, this looks like a nice summer island. Well, it is. It's Hickory Island in the middle of the St. Lawrence River. And what happened was that the Patriots came over from French Creek, which is now Clayton, New York. They came across the ice. There was one farmhouse on Hickory Island, so not much opposition. And they actually came to this end of the island, and they took it over. Now, there was a problem, a couple of problems. It was minus 27 degrees that day. Their leader, General Rensselaer Van Rensselaer, liked his alcohol, so he was inebriated. Everybody kind of lost faith in this, and they all skedaddled back. So, another complete disaster on Hickory Island. We now move back to the Detroit River, and the next incursion was the Battle of Fighting Island on February 21st, 1838. This is a depiction by Forster of that battle. It's a small Canadian island, and again the rebels came across the Detroit River, captured this island, but as usual they were driven off by the militia and the troops that had come back. Now, what is this? This is the rebel pup. This is the only cannon that the Patriots had on Fighting Island. So you can see that they weren't well armed. This little cannon was then taken by members of the Kent Volunteers, and if you go to Chatham, it's on the front lawn of the Chatham-Kent Museum that you wouldn't really know. I mean, it's an important artifact. There it sits forlornly, but if you're there, you will find it. The next major incursion was the invasion of Pili Island. Before global warming, Lake Erie froze. So the Patriots came across the ice from Sandusky, Ohio, on their sleighs. They captured Pili Island, which again, there weren't many people living there. They actually held it for a week. That's probably the last time Americans have held Canadian property other than our finances. However, when the British at Fort Malden heard, they decided, well, we will walk across the ice from Fort Malden and we'll attack. So the Battle of Pili Island actually took place on March 3rd, 1838. And here we can see a picture, but what are these troops standing on? What does it look like? There's the island. It's, remember, it's winter. What's this?
So they're on the ice?
It's on the ice. That's important because this is considered a naval engagement, and I'm not telling lies. That's what it was. It was on the ice. It's true. It's true. They were driven off again. There were a number killed there, both on the rebel side and on the loyalist side, and the rest of the rebels got on their sleighs, went back across the ice to Sandusky. So even if you go to Pili Island, you'll see a kind of worn out plaque, but that's the only way you can find out today where that was on Pili Island. If you go there, there's some original buildings from that period. This is a John Fox log house, and the rebels would have taken that house over when they invaded. This is the Pili Island Lighthouse that was restored some years ago, built in 1833. When the rebels took over the island, they disabled the lighthouse, but it's still there to see. If you go to Fort Malden, if it's open, I'm going to say that all night because it really bothers me immensely, you will see this. This is the sword of General, and he called himself a general, but he wasn't really, Thomas Jefferson Sutherland. And it was confiscated, and there it is on view. Sutherland was captured on the ice of the Detroit River and jailed, but subsequently it was decided that he was actually captured on the American side of the Detroit River. So he was let go.
Yeah.
Sutherland's an amazing man. He continued to write and write and write about this, and he's somebody that somebody should write a book about. The next incursion was back on the St. Lawrence River. It was the burning of the Sir Robert Peel. It was a British steamer, May 29th and 30th. Raiders dressed as Indians. Now, remember, these men called themselves patriots. What happened in Boston in 1776? And what did the men dress up as? So these guys were trying to replicate what had happened in 1776. So they attacked the steamer, they drove all the crew and the men and women aboard off. They had hoped to steal this steamer and use it for their future invasions, but they were so inept they couldn't get the boilers started. So they decided, well, then what we'll do is we'll just burn it, and they did, and its remains are still sunk in the St. Lawrence River. The next series of events, strangely enough, are very little written about this, and they were called the St. Clair Incursions. There were 4 incursions on the St. Clair River, and notice all of them are adjoining the United States. And on June 26, 1838, a schooner started off in Palmer, Michigan, sailed to, of all places, Goderich, and looted Goderich and pillaged it. Nothing's written about that, but it did happen. Then on June 22nd, another sloop came across from the American side, and it raided the town of Sombra, which is still there today, and it looted stores. It took 2 hostages back to Michigan. And the militia and native people from the St. Clair Reserve decided we're going to go get the 2. So they invaded the United States, which could have started a war between England and the United States. Remember, up till now it was Americans coming into Canada. Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed, and the 2 men that were kidnapped were brought back. There were 2 other incursions, one at a place on June 27th called Nugent's Inn on the St. Clair River. And finally, there was a Sergeant Carey who was unfortunately shot on Bear Creek. And so those are the 4 incidences of the St. Clair raids. Now out of that, only 1 man would be transported to Van Diemen's Land. And he was charged with burglary, not with piratical invasion. The next event was in Short Hills, the Niagara River, and this event was between June 10th and July 3rd. Again, Americans came across the Niagara River. They finally had a battle on the July 3rd at Short Hills, and the Patriots were again roundly defeated and driven off. The next most serious, and this is the most serious incursion, happened here. This is called the Battle of the Windmill. This is an actual period view of it that was in Daniel Eustace's book, who was one of the Patriots captured and wrote about it in the narrative later in 1847. This battle took place between November 12th and 16th. 60 men were captured eventually and were transported to Van Diemen's Land. Here's another view of it that Mackenzie had in his Mackenzie's Caroline Almanac. Now, again, there's confusion because people think Mackenzie was involved in 1838, but he wasn't. He was involved on Navy Island, which was in December 1837. His son James was involved, but Mackenzie divorced himself from the Patriots or the Hunters' Lodges. He kept writing about it in his newspaper. Remember, he had gone to New York State, he'd escaped. Then he was arrested in New York State and actually put in prison for a period. But he kept doing his newspaper. Here's an interesting view of after the Battle of Windsor, of the Windmill by Henry Francis Ainsley. And basically there was the stone windmill, stone buildings, the Patriots holed up in there. There you can see the remains. What happened was that not only regular troops with cannon from Fort Wellington, but also British warships on the St. Lawrence bombarded these buildings and drove the Patriots out. If you're down that way, just near Prescott, that's what's left of it. This was the McQueen Brothers Mill, and now it's a lighthouse for ship navigation, but that's one of the buildings that the Patriots were in. If you go to Fort Wellington, this is an exhibit. Those are the uniforms that the Patriots wore. So they dressed up like soldiers, they carried swords, they gave themselves commissions, but they really weren't very good at being soldiers. The last incursion was December 4th, 1838, the Battle of Windsor. And here's another depiction of it. Again, the Patriots came across the Detroit River. They burned a steamer at the dock. Then they advanced on Sandwich, and the battle actually took place here. This is the Francois Bobby House on Pitt Street in Windsor. This is now Windsor's Community Museum, but the battle would have taken place across the street from this in the apple orchard. This is the rebel drum that was captured at the Battle of Windsor. It's now at Fort Malden. You wouldn't know it because it's downtown Windsor, so that's good that the plaque's up in front of the museum. And they've done a good thing here too in Sandwich. They've actually depicted it in a mural because again you wouldn't have any idea that it happened in the area. Now let's talk about some of the people that were intimately involved. This is Sir George Arthur. He's the man that replaced Francis Bond Head as Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada. He's the man that had come from Van Diemen's Land in the middle of the rebellion and was the father of the penal colonies. We heard about Lount and Matthews earlier, and there's Mrs. Lount interceding with Sir George Arthur to try to save her husband with no success. There is a depiction of the hanging of Matthews at Lount in Lount Toronto Jail. Mackenzie included this in his newspaper. There's some thought that he even paid an artist. So you can see poor old Matthews and Lount. The rebels were housed in the Toronto jail, so they're looking out at their colleagues who are dead at that point. Another important character is this man, Colonel John Prince. He was a local magistrate. He was an MP. He was a colonel in the militia. He was stationed in Sandwich. At the Battle of Windsor, he was in charge of the militia, and he ordered the first 5 patriots captured to be shot on the spot, executed. Summary execution. And that happened. They shot 5 men. His argument was, they're brigands, they're pirates, they're not a formal army, they have no sanction, so he executed them. That caused a huge furor. There was petitions, there was discussions in the Parliament in London. Prince was a character, and soon after that he had a duel with the treasurer of the Western District, and these are the actual dueling pistols. Mr. Wood's gun didn't go off. Prince's did, and he shot Wood in the face. After Prince, there was some thought that he would be charged, but he wasn't, and then he was made a judge in Sault Ste. Marie. And his name's not Mike Duffy. So all these men were put in chains, and here's a picture of C.W. Jeffrey's picture of rebels in chains. And the men from down in the Essex region were transported to London. And this is a view of London, Upper Canada. York Street looking westward. Here's another view from Alexander's Brook Blockade. And you can see they're clearing out the forest, but there's substantial buildings by 1838. This is the Barracks. It was a central military place. Wonderful courthouse, which was built between 1826 and 1829. It was based on the model of Malahide Castle, which was Colonel Thomas Talbot's home in Ireland. And the part of the story here is that the Patriot prisoners were put in the cells, which are in the basement of that building. If you go to London today, there's that building, it's still there, used as the administrative offices for Middlesex County. They were then taken to Toronto, and this is a view of the Toronto Harbour in 1838 by Coke Smith. Another view of the harbour by Wilson Bartlett. This is a view of the 3rd Parliament buildings, used between 1832 and 1893. What happened to the 2nd Parliament buildings? They were burned. So, but those were the Parliament buildings in 1838. There's a view of the Toronto Courthouse and Jail and St. James Anglican Church. This is John Howard's view of the jail, and that's where Matthews and Lount were executed. And this is another interesting view of the Toronto jail. And you can see a windmill. So putting that in context, that's where Gooderman Works is. That's where the distillery district is today. So it's changed quite a lot since that. But that's the view that would have been. There's a proposed courthouse in there that was never built. Patriots then were taken down the St. Lawrence, down Lake Ontario to Kingston. And this is the view from 1840 of Kingston. This is an interesting connection to Van Diemen's Land. This is called the Box, and this is was used at the Kingston Penitentiary, and it was originally found in Van Diemen's Land, and I put it in because it's at the Penitentiary Museum in Kingston. So that would have been for either men or women, not at the same time. It was a single solitary cell, so it's like a coffin. Not a pretty thing. This is a view of Fort Henry, and this is where the prisoners were taken. Now, Niels van Schultz was the leader of the Battle of the Windmill, and he was the only one publicly executed at Fort Henry. You can see the scaffold, the gallows to the left there. And so he's the only one that was executed there. He asked to be executed there because he was the prisoner, he was the leader. A number of others were executed, and all the prisoners were kept there. And this is a fantastic, I don't know if you've read lately in the paper about the Winkworth collection that was up for sale, and Canada's bought some of it. They bought this previously, and this is an interior view of Fort Malden in 1841. And the prisoners were kept, you can see bars in the windows there. That's where they were kept before they were sent off to Montreal.
In Fort Malden or in Fort Henry?
Sorry, did I say Malden?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, that's Fort Henry.
It looks like Fort Henry.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
And so they're moving towards Quebec City,
Right.
and so that was one of their stops. And this is what they might have seen as they were coming into Quebec City. This is Coke Smith's version. They wouldn't have seen that because that's a tourist version from 1840. They weren't allowed to walk around, nor would they have seen the Citadel, but those are all period views. Who's that man?
John Frank.
We're hearing a lot about Lieutenant or Sir John Franklin these days, and we have to realize that Franklin was here looking for the Northwest Passage the first time. Then he went back to England. What happened to Sir George Arthur, who was in Van Diemen's Land? What happened to him? Remember I said he...
Took over for Bondhead.
Thank you. Yes, he did. So he took over from Bondhead. Franklin was sent to Van Diemen's Land to take over from Arthur.
Oh.
All right? Now, what's even stranger was that Franklin was Ben Franklin's nephew. So there was a total difference between their political views. Franklin was quite uncomfortable in inheriting a system that really didn't work very well. But we'll talk about him later. 92 men then, 92 English-speaking men, 58 French-speaking were put aboard HMS Buffalo, and that's an interior view of the Buffalo. French Canadians were kept on one side, the English-speaking were kept on the other. And if we look at that yellow route,
Oh, yeah.
there were two other vessels that had gone to England with prisoners first, and they had their trials in England, and they took the route from England to Van Diemen's Land. Arthur decided, I think, well, I'm not going to fool around with all this bureaucracy. We'll just send them to Van Diemen's Land, and what's anybody going to do about it? So that's what he did. And you can see the route in yellow. It took them 137 days, 4.5 months, over 16,000 miles. So they stopped only once in Rio de Janeiro to replenish, and then they sailed on to Hobart Town. Now people ask me, what is Van Diemen's Land? Where does that name come from? It was named by Dutch explorer Abel Tasman to honor Anthony van Diemen, who was the Governor General of the Dutch East Indies. The name Tasmania, although it was used from the 1820s, it wasn't officially used until November 1855. And that's because there was such a tainted, Van Diemen's Land, the name was so tainted as a penal colony that they decided to change it to Tasmania. From 1812 until 1853, 67,000 convicts were sent to Van Diemen's Land. Now, the majority of those were from England and Ireland and Scotland, and they were felons. You could be sent down there for even stealing a loaf of bread. The men I'm talking about were sent down as political prisoners, so they were treated differently. This is what they might have seen as they came into Hobart Town. This is a view by Thomas Bach of Hobart Town. This is another view of the old jetty from 1833. And this is actually a view from 1840 of the new wharf, and this is where the Buffalo had docked and the prisoners disembarked. Now, this is what they might have seen, a chain gang, because the felons, the common criminals, were on chain gangs. The men I'm talking about, it was prohibited to put them on chain gangs because they were political prisoners. There was a thought that we have to give these men religion to solve their problems. And it didn't matter whether you were Jewish or Catholic or any Baptist, you all went here to St. George's Anglican Church in Battery Point. And you went there every Sunday as a prisoner. Now I put this slide in because this is a wonderful church. It's still in Hobart, it's still in use. So if you go to Tasmania, you can actually go to that church. And it's called St. George's. The next thing that they did was that they were sent to what were called probation stations. And this is a change because prior to 1840, convicts were sent to Van Diemen's Land and they were assigned work with individuals. There was a change in 1840 and the government said, we're not going to do that anymore. They're all going to work on government projects. So that they were put into probation stations. The problem with that is that you can't find them because most of them have disappeared. So the first one they went to was in Sandy Bay, which was near Hobart, and this is all that's left of that probation station, the superintendent's house. Hobart was a whaling port, and so these prisoners were attempting to escape to get on an American whaling ship to go back to the United States. That wasn't allowed, and 4 men tried that. They were then sent as second offenders to Port Arthur. There's a view of Port Arthur, penal settlement of Port Arthur, 1841.
Port Arthur was on the mainland?
No, well, it is. No, it's part of Tasmania at the southern tip, the Tasman Peninsula. And it's purposely there because you can't escape from it. There's water all around it. And it was it's for second offenders, so the worst of the worst. This is another view of it, 1845. And strangely enough, Canada was even interested in it because this is a view of it from the Canadian magazine, November 1907. It's still there. It's quite a tourist attraction. Personally, I think they spend too much time, the state of Tasmania, interpreting it because it's only a small part of the story. But if you're there, you should go and see it.